Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Remember last Easter, worshiping at home? All the questions running through our minds. Worship leaders last year were wondering, maybe we can have an Easter celebration in June or July with everybody back. Well, that seems silly now. But we had lots of questions. Will I get COVID? Will I lose someone I love to it? Which experts should we believe? When will there be a vaccine? When will things get back to normal? Well, we now have answers to some of those questions, but to some of them we don't have answers yet, and we may never have answers. But I'm just thankful today. Thankful to be able to be here worshiping with you and to be joining with people who are worshiping online, all together as one, the body of Christ. And I am so thankful that the message of Jesus' resurrection is still as true as it ever was. And it still has the power to transform our lives, to shape and mold us into the people that God wants us to be. Questions are something that human beings just naturally ask. To be human is to question. If you've ever hung around a toddler who starts playing the why question, why, over and over again, you know what I'm talking about. Human beings ask questions. I think we are the only ones of God's creatures who actually ask questions. Now, cats are curious, but every cat I've ever known acts like it already knows everything. And dogs, they sometimes tip their heads to the side and have their ears up, and they get this questioning look in their eyes, as if to ask you, why won't you throw my toy for me just one more time? But when it comes to the deepest questions, questions about life and death, questions about purpose and meaning, questions about where the world is headed after all, those are reserved for you and me, for human beings. Russian author Leo Tolstoy once wrote about a question that dogged him his entire life. He sought the answer to this his entire life. And it's a question that I think that's common to all human beings. He writes, "My question was the simplest of questions, lying in the soul of every person. A question without an answer to which one cannot really live. It was, what will come of what I'm doing today and tomorrow? What will come of my whole life? Is there any meaning in life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy?" It's a pretty deep question. And there are lots of people in our world today who would answer Tolstoy with a firm no. No, there's nothing that's going to mean anything when you finally die, that your life really doesn't have any ultimate purpose or meaning. You're just a speck of dust in this huge cosmos. But the resurrection of Jesus gives us a better answer than that. Because to be human is to ask questions. God is big enough to handle all of our questions, and He wants our questions. Our questions actually kind of reveal a yearning ultimately for God. The Bible is filled with questions. In fact, Jesus often answered questions with questions. There's an old saying that goes like this. There was an old rabbi, and somebody asked him, "Rabbi, why do you so often answer questions with questions?" And the old rabbi thought about it a second, and he said, "Well, why shouldn't I answer questions with questions?" And see, Jesus did that quite often. There was a time when somebody asked him, these are just examples, somebody asked him, "Should we pay taxes to Caesar? Is it lawful to do that?" And Jesus responded, "Well, whose image is on the coin?" And another time, the Pharisees came to Jesus and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders?" Jesus responded, "Why do you break the command of God for your tradition?" See, Jesus often responded to questions with penetrating questions that were meant to move people in a new direction. And so on this Easter, it's okay to bring our questions to God, even our deepest questions. Jesus even did that on the cross when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's okay to bring God our deepest questions. The women on that very first Easter, as they walked to the tomb, were discussing a question. The question was, who will roll the stone away from the tomb? You see, they were grief-stricken, and they were in that hazy grief fog. If you've ever experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. And they were on their way to the tomb with these spices to anoint the body of Jesus, and it occurred to them, we might not even be able to get into the tomb to do what we need to do. Who will roll away the stone from the tomb? When they got there, they discovered that God was already one step ahead of them. They got their answer. That stone was already rolled away, even as they were asking the question, which was their first hint that here God was doing what had been promised for ages. He was, as the prophet Isaiah said it in the Old Testament reading, he was swallowing up death forever. That stone rolled away, the tomb empty. There sat a young man in a white robe, and his words changed the world forever. He said, "He is risen. He is risen from death." And that meant that God was not going to take our lives to an eternal nothing. It meant that God isn't going to just save us spiritually and help us escape from a physical world. It meant that God was redeeming humanity. He was in the process of a whole new creation. Resurrection means bodily resurrection. It's physical and spiritual. God was restoring to its original intent his good and gracious creation, and Jesus was the first fruit of that. And so what did the women do in response to that earth-shattering news? Well, Mark tells us they ran from the tomb, afraid, and said nothing to anyone. It's kind of a strange way to end his gospel. But a lot of people have noticed that one reason that Mark might have ended his gospel that way is we all know that the women eventually did tell other people, because if they hadn't, then you and I wouldn't be here this morning and nobody would have ever heard about it. So they eventually did tell. And so the ending of Mark kind of begs all of us, it asks all of us, how are you going to finish the story of Jesus' resurrection in your life? Those women became bearers of that good news and sharers of that good news. And Mark's gospel cries out to you and me to also be bearers of that good news in this world and sharers of it with anyone willing to hear. Because this is the most important thing that's ever happened in the world, the resurrection of Jesus. As St. Paul said it in the Corinthians reading today, this is of first importance. It's most important. It fulfills that promise that was summarized so beautifully in Isaiah 25. I'm just going to reread a section of that again. If you can imagine this, some of you are going to have Easter feasts this afternoon. But the resurrection of Jesus is a feast that looks like this. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make a feast. He will swallow up the covering cast over all people. He will swallow up death forever and wipe away tears from all places. So it's good to come to God with all of our questions on Easter, because our questions indicate that we are yearning, we are longing for God, and God doesn't disappoint. So let me play the rabbi role for a moment and just ask some Easter questions of you. You don't have to answer out loud, but just listen. So what if? What if all that's bad and sinful and ugly and hurtful and broken in this world, what if all of that is just the death throes of an enemy who's already been defeated? And what if all that's good and beautiful and gracious and kind and forgiving and loving, what if that is where God is taking the world? What if we're not just tiny specks in this huge cosmos whose lives are just a nanosecond of meaninglessness? What if instead God, who created the cosmos in the first place, loves you and me so much that he became one of us, joined us in our humanness, suffered the death that we will one day face, all of us, and was raised again to show us where our lives are headed? Even if somebody dragged you here to church this morning, or you're online and you're not quite sure of this and you have a hard time believing it, you should want it to be true, that your life is wrapped up in God's life, and that every question of meaning and purpose that you have is answered in the resurrection of Jesus, that your life makes a difference to God and to the people around you. Author N.T. Wright posed a good question, a good resurrection question for Christians. He asked once, what if Christians during the days and weeks after Easter did things that were so filled with joy and kindness and graciousness that a skeptical world would stop and ask, why are you doing such joyful and kind things? That's a great question, a great resurrection question. And so again, playing the rabbi, I'll just ask a couple more Easter questions for you. In the spirit of N.T. Wright, why not write that note to that person you know is hurting right now, and you've been meaning to write it, you just haven't gotten around to it yet. Celebrate Jesus' resurrection by writing it. Or how about noticing the good in the people around you and letting them know about it, whether it's at work or at school or in your own family? What a great way to celebrate Jesus' resurrection. Or how about trying one more time to reconcile with that person you've been estranged from? All great ways to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Well, our musicians have prepared a beautiful song that we're going to sing in just a moment. And as they make their way here, I want to invite you into this song. It's a question song. Is he worthy? And this song poses some of our deepest human questions, and it folds those questions into the answer that Jesus' resurrection gives. And so I invite you, as this music is played, to simply let it wash over you like a refreshing spring. Let the message of this music roll the stone away for you, whatever stone it is that's keeping you from following Jesus more deeply. Because this song asks and answers some great questions, such as, does the Father really love us? He does. And it's because, join me here, people, Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Does the Spirit dwell among us? He does, because Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Does Jesus hold forever those he loves? He does, because Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Do you feel the world's broken?
We do.
Do you feel the shadows deepen?
We do.
But do you know that all the dark won't stop the light from getting through?
We do.
Do you wish that you could see it all made new.
We do.
Is all creation groaning? There's a new creation coming. Is the glory of the Lord to be the light within our midst? Is it good that we remind ourselves of this? Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah conquered the grave. He is David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slave. Is he worthy? Is he worthy of all blessing and honor and glory? Is he worthy of this? He is the Father truly love us? Does the Spirit move among us? And does Jesus our Messiah hold forever those he loves? Does our God intend to dwell again with us? Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah who conquered the grave. He is David's root and